Shattered Hope was a perk added in the Roots of Dread chapter, but not as a teachable perk for the Dredge. Instead, it was the first original perk created for the game in 5 years, as the last one, not including the perks from the Stranger Things DLC, was Thrill of the Hunt, added on patch 1.3.1, released back on December of 2016. However, just like Gabriel Soma would say,
something happened.
This perk, which was created as a meta counter pick, was absolutely forgotten by everyone. There is a chance that most viewers don't even recognize this perk or know what the effect is exactly. On YouTube, basically nobody has done a build specialized on this perk nor has talked about it, and most videos that do are 1 year old. And on nightlight.gg, a website that manually tracks perk usage based on user inputs, Shattered Hope rests as the second least used perk in the entire game for killers, which is a significant feat considering the fact that any new player can unlock this perk without paying. Even if the statistics on this website are from a small sample, when was the last time you personally saw a killer using this perk? Or when was the last time you yourself used it? And this led me to believe that Shattered Hope is, in fact, the worst perk in Dead by Daylight. On October of 2021, 8 months before the introduction of this perk, Michaela Reed was added as part of the mid-chapter update, bringing with herself an entirely new gameplay mechanic for survivors, Boon Totems. Her 2 Boon perks, Circle of Healing and Shadow Step, allowed you to interact with a totem and create entire safe areas for your whole team that will give passive benefits, while Shadow Step was left as, in my opinion, an underrated perk. Circle of Healing completely dominated the meta of Dead by Daylight. Back when this perk first released, Circle of Healing allowed survivors to heal themselves at a faster speed than self-care, so this meant survivors didn't even have to bring medkits into the match as long as one of the survivors in the team had this perk equipped. This completely butchered the hit and run tactic, making characters like Ghostface, Sadako, Wraith or the Pig significantly weaker just with one survivor having one perk. This meta was very boring to play against, and very safe to play as. Since we're looking at this as a retrospective, it's safe to say that this was not balanced at all. However, Michaela was also not the only one bringing Boon perks. Jonah added Boon Exponential, which allowed you to have infinite Unbreakable in the radius of the boon, and Yuichi Asakawa brought Dark Theory, a boon that made you faster in a specific area. And so, as a solution to this problem they created, and a way to help killer players, Behavior created an answer to the boon perk meta, Shattered Hope. Shattered Hope's entire perk design and philosophy rests into being a counter pick perk, meaning that this perk depends entirely on an external factor in order to work. This is not the only perk like this, as the majority of meta perks actually work as perks that help with the inherent problems of the game, and these types of perks are what I like to call band-aid fixes, as I define that as perks that were created by Behavior in order to fix fundamental balance issues the game has, instead of balancing and fixing the game in order to prevent that issue on the first place. For example, Tunneling of Hook was something very strong and popular back in the days, and Borrowed Time was created in order to prevent that and make it harder for the killer to do so, which is now a base kit feature for survivors. Unbreakable was created as a band-aid fix to prevent slugging back in the days, and Behavior even wanted to make Unbreakable base kit in order to prevent slugging even more, again adding a band-aid fix. Corrupt Intervention helps with the bad spawn RNG at the start of the match and the inability to pressure the early game for a lot of killer kits like the Trapper, Michael Myers or the Hag, and the devs wanted to add the early game collapse back in the days in order to help with this, but it was ultimately scrapped. And as you can see with these examples, these perks are created as answers to problems the game has, and Shattered Hope was created in order to fix boons being way too strong. The problem is that Shattered Hope is the only counterpick perk that entirely relies on a mechanic that is not part of the base kit game. Borrowed Time's entire purpose as a perk is to help with tunneling of the hook. However, any killer can tunnel off the hook if they desire. Even if the killer never camped or never tunneled, that action was still a possibility in every single match. The same applies to Unbreakable, as it is regarded as one of the strongest survivor perks in the game and a perk that can entirely change the course of a match with a single use. Yet at the same time, if a killer does not slug you at any point in the match, it's basically useless. But slugging is a core component of a game. Even if the killer never slugged, that mechanic and possibility is still part of the game, and anyone can do that as a killer. But with Shattered Hope, this perk only works when a survivor intentionally brings a boon perk into the game. If none of the 16 perks in the match are boons, this perk is a complete waste of slot. The core problem and the biggest flaw of this perk is that it is a general perk, meaning that every single killer can have this perk for free, but boons are a mechanic gated behind a paywall or a significant grind of 35 hours in order to unlock either Michaela or Jonah, and I believe this makes no sense from a game design perspective. A new player might unlock this perk in their Blood Web when they start playing for the first time, and they might read the effect, but the problem is that player might not even know what a boon perk is. It does not appear as a mechanic in the tutorial, nor a mechanic that any new player might see in their starting hours, and this perk fully depends on a survivor bringing a boon in order to work, because it has no secondary passive at all or inherent value by simply existing. Let's take a look at Off the Record, another meta perk for survivors. This is obviously a meta perk because it prevents killers from tunneling so easy off hook, just like Borrowed Time did in the past. However, this perk is still strong even if the killer never decides to tunnel, because it still has a passive effect of hiding your aura and suppressing your grunts of pain while injured for 80 seconds. This is an example of a secondary passive that makes this perk have value constantly, as long as you get hooked once. Now let's take a look at Old Death Heart. This perk allowed you to tank a hit of the killer with a well-timed button press, and this effect was so strong and potentially game-changing that it dictated the way the game was played for killers even if the survivor didn't use Death Heart. You had to assume every single survivor had the perk Death Heart, and so killers had to come close to the survivors and bait hits before downing them. The time lost in baiting a hit and predicting Death Heart, or wasting your time on a survivor that does not have Death Heart, is still smaller than the risk of that survivor tanking the hit with the perk and extending the chase for longer. The same is applied to Pain Resonance. You don't know if the killer is using this perk until you are hit by it, so survivors will stop repairing a generator before the killer hooks a survivor in order to prevent screaming and the activation of potentially Deadman Switch. Even if those perks are not in play, it's still the best and most logical thing to do as a survivor in order to simply prevent those perks from activating. These are examples of inherent perk values simply by existing, and there are more examples of perks like these, even perks that are not meta or strong, like Blood Warden, Noed, or Power Struggle. All of those perks might not get any value in the majority of matches, but when they do, the value is so significant it is enough to dictate the course of a match and the end result. So for that reason, survivors might want to prevent Blood Warden from happening, and the same applies to killers preventing pallets while carrying a survivor in order to prevent Power Struggle. And finally, let's go back to Shattered Hope. To start, this perk has no secondary passive, so if survivors bring no boons, you are wasting one slot out of 4 killer perks, and killer perks are very important because with only 4 perk slots, you have to compete against 16 survivor perk slots, so you end up playing the entire match with only 3 perks, which is a significant handicap. Compare this to Lightborn, a perk that has only one purpose and it's a very niche one. That purpose is to counter flashlights. The thing is that before the match starts, you know already if the survivors will bring any flashlights, so you can prepare accordingly, so Lightborn still has value. But with Shattered Hope, you cannot guarantee that survivors will use boons in any way before the match starts, unless you are playing against a new Michaela with default cosmetics. And the second issue is the effect itself. Currently, if a killer snuffs a totem, that totem does not break. Instead, only the boon effect is extinguished. This means that survivors have basically no drawbacks in using boons, as they can infinitely activate the boon effect on the same totem, forcing the killers to snuff them if the effect is too strong. This is especially good when the boon totem is hidden in a remote part of the map that has no generators, forcing the killer to go out of their way in order to counter it. Well, Shattered Hope instead allows the killer to break that totem so survivors cannot reuse it again, and also it reveals the aura of any survivors that were within its range for 8 seconds. The issue here is that this effect by itself is not strong enough to warrant a perk slot at all. Blood Warden can eventually lead to a sacrifice at the end of the game. Power Struggle can lead to you escaping from the killer's grasp and wasting their time significantly. Both of those effects are exclusive to the perks, but however, Shattered Hope only breaks one of the 5 totems found in the map, which means survivors can still use boons 4 times more. But also, the aura reveal is not that strong of an effect, and it does not significantly change the curse of the game because you achieve the same effect with the more easier to activate and more consistent perks like Nowhere to Hide or Awakened Awareness. And the fun fact, there are 4 boon totems in the game as of writing this video. One of them is Shadow Step, a boon that prevents aura reading from killer perks and also it hides your scratch marks. It also has a lingering effect, lasting 4 seconds after exiting the area of effect of the boon. This means that if the boon you shattered with Shattered Hope was Shadow Step, you won't be able to see the aura of the survivors at the start of the effect, and you will only be able to see it after 4 seconds passed, leaving you with only 4 seconds to notice that survivor hiding in the area of effect. To make things worse, this entire effect can also be countered entirely by Distortion, a fantastic survivor perk that cloaks you from killer aura reading. So a perk that only works as a counter to boon perks can be completely countered by a perk that counters literally every single aura reading perk in the game. And to be completely honest, the main effect of breaking the totem is only strong if you pair it with Pentimento, because like earlier stated, survivors can simply just find another totem, so as a killer, you still have to go to the new area of the boon to manually break it with Shattered Hope. And let's go back to Distortion, because this perk actually shares one thing in common with Shattered Hope, and that is the fact that it fully depends on whatever perks or add-ons the other side is running. If the killer doesn't run any aura reading, then Distortion is technically useless, right? Well, not exactly. Distortion's lack of effect is also very important information because it immediately tells you what perks the killer is not running, which can be really useful if you are a good survivor. No tokens at the start? Well, then the killer is not running the perk Lethal Pursuer. You do not get your aura revealed after a hook? Well, no barbecue and chili. Shattered Hope does not have that passive benefit as the design requires a survivor to use a boon totem, and knowing whether a survivor has or doesn't have a boon totem is not required, as there is a global sound effect anytime a boon is set up, so no matter what, Distortion still has use, and it is a very good perk to run nowadays because of Lethal Pursuer being so popular. And that's exactly the second issue of Shattered Hope, It is a perk that completely depends on the survivor meta. If there is an overwhelming amount of boons, then Shattered Hope is a good pick, but that means the meta is horrible. But if no survivor uses a boon, this perk is completely useless. If one survivor uses a boon, this perk is still not worth it and not good at all. And if Shattered Hope were to be too good, no survivor would use boons. There is no winning with this perk because no matter what, in order for the perk to work, you require a problem that will completely hurt the balance of the game. So for those reasons, I conclude that Shattered Hope is the worst perk in Dead by Daylight. Obviously not counting Gnome either, because at least the design of that perk is intended to be bad. So, to sum up all arguments presented in this video, Shattered Hope is number 1. A free general perk that any newcomer can use that only works against a mechanic that is paywalled or behind a massive grind. Number 2. It is fully dependent on survivors running a specific perk, and it has no secondary passive or any secondary effect that helps in the case the survivors don't run boons. Number 3. Even at best, it is not that useful of an effect and not game changing in any way, to the point the existence of this perk warrants the survivors to play in another way. And number 4. It is fully dependent on the survivor meta being a specific one in order to have any significant use when combined with another perk that is not accessible to new players. So, what are the solutions to this perk? In fact, does the perk need any balancing? After all, it's a general perk that generates no revenue to the developers, so they have no reason to waste their energy into making this perk good. But as a content creator, I still wanted to offer new ideas to make this perk at least usable, as that's what I want from the game, to have every perk be usable in at least some situations. One of the solutions I have seen was to make this perk base kit but without the aura reading. In other words, change the effects of this perk and make snuffing boons actually break the totem's base kit. As someone that loves playing killer, I love this change, but I have to admit that it would honestly make boons useless after the balance change they did to them, as not many survivors run boons anymore because the problem was mainly Circle of Healing, which ended up nerfed. The most obvious addition to this perk would be to make its effect as secondary and instead create a new effect as the main one for the perk. As to what that effect is, I personally don't know, and I don't have any suggestions to make, as the devs would have to fundamentally create a new perk. But I really think what they did with Lethal Pursuer, for example, can be applied to Shattered Hope, because Lethal Pursuer was a perk that only worked at the start, and then you were playing with only 3 perks, but they added a secondary effect that makes it so good to use in any loadout. And one of the most interesting ideas I have seen, and it kinda makes sense, is to create a new boon perk that is not tied to any DLC character, and instead it's a general perk that new players can run too. This way, the boon mechanic becomes a part of the game without having to pay or grind for any characters. Again, this would have to be a unique boon effect, and since it would be free, it cannot be too strong. I thought about a perk boon idea that would reveal the aura of any survivor and the thing they are interacting with inside the area of the boon. This way, you can set up a boon near a generator, and when you start working on that generator, your aura and the generator's progress will be revealed to everyone. And the same would apply to a totem, a chest, or even healing another survivor or yourself with a medkit. I don't think the effect is too strong to the point it will be a meta perk, but it's still a nice effect to have for survivors that are new to the game and not game breaking or altering the gameplay of new killers that they might not understand. By making a boon perk for new players, Shattered Hope now makes logical sense to be a general perk, as this way new players might have interacted with a boon totem before, so they understand what it is and how to counter it with Shattered Hope. The only issue with this suggestion I see is that maybe boon totems are a complex mechanic that is better left for players that are a little more advanced in the game, but it still leads to the paradox of a free perk only countering paid perks. Out of all the 3 solutions provided, I believe simply adding a secondary worthy effect like they did with Lethal Pursuer is enough to make this perk good, or at least not the worst perk in the entire game. Let me know what you think of these suggestions, or if you have any that you think would help Shattered Hope be a good perk, or if you disagree with me that Shattered Hope is not the worst perk in the game, and if you think so, which one it is then. Thank you for watching and have a nice day.